You, Tim.
Mhm.
All right, so let's get started with our study. Again, we are studying from workbook this quarter, Christians' approach to the dealing with the issues of life. And so today we are thinking about, this is lesson 3, I think we're on. I lost count. Lesson 4, worldly success. So what's a Christian's approach to worldly success? We want to think about that. I was talking to a friend, I think it was last week sometime. We were talking, and he was telling me a little story about his father-in-law, and just something that really impressed him about his father-in-law. He said his father-in-law, a few years ago, back when video stores were big, back before Netflix and Redbox and all those other things took over, he owned a video store, but was making really good money, making a good income from it, but decided to sell it because there were certain movies. They didn't sell any of the really bad stuff that's out there in some video stores, but just even some, rated R movies, PG-13, he just didn't feel comfortable as a Christian renting those out to people and selling those to people. And so he closed down a store, sold it, got rid of it. Just felt like as a Christian, that wasn't something that he could do with a clear conscience anymore, and decided to open his own little tool shop, actually, and started making tools and doing like tool and die type stuff for some companies. But it was an encouraging story, an impressive story, and I think it's a story that, as we think about our lesson here today, is a good one to get us started, because that's really what we're thinking about. We have to make decisions in our life. Obviously, we have to work and we have to earn an income, and in order to live. Most people, aren't born with a silver spoon in their mouth to where they don't have to work any. And so, but we have to balance those things too. We have to not be so consumed with our work and with our business and making money that we set aside spiritual things or other things that God feels are important in our earthly lives beyond work and making money. And so that's what we want to think about here today. I want to think a little bit about worldly success. So there's a bunch of passages in here, really good passages. It's amazing how much the Bible talks about money, how much it talks about riches, talks about just principles surrounding earthly, worldly success versus spiritual success. And so I think it's going to be good for us to do some reading. So if you got your Bibles open, again, we're just kind of using the workbook as a basic guideline. And I'm going to ask some different people to read. So be ready to jump in there with us. The first text, though, is James 5, verses 1 through 5. And so I'll take volunteers if you jump right in. Otherwise, I'll probably just call on somebody. So let's see. I see Zoe there. Sam with you, Zoe? All right. I think I see him in the deep, dark background. James 5, 1 through 5. Sam, can you read that for us loud and clear? And the question I want to ask is, according to this passage, can it be a temptation for Christians to withhold their riches, be a little bit stingy with their riches? Let's take a look at it. Let's think about what the consequences are of that. So, Sam, can you read that for us? James 5, verses 1 through 5.
Come now, you rich, weep and howl for your miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver are corroded, and their corrosion will be witness against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. You have heaped up treasure in the last days. Indeed, the wages of your laborers who mowed your fields, which you keep back by fraud, cry out, and the cries of the reapers have reached the ears of the Lord of Sabbath. You have lived on the earth in pleasure and luxury. You have fattened your hearts as in a day of slaughter.
Okay. So as we read that passage, the idea of being someone who is rich is not necessarily, I don't think, the sin here. I think if you take a look at what's going on, it says that there were laborers who mowed your fields and you kept it back by fraud. These people were getting rich by taking advantage of other people. And God is not light with that type of sin here. Weep and howl for your miseries that are coming upon you. That's very blunt. That's very blatant. And take a look at verse 5. You've lived on the earth in pleasure and luxury, and you've fattened your hearts as in a day of slaughter. I mean, that's kind of a reference to what the farmers do with the cows, right? We feed the cows the lots of grass and lots of grain, and we try to fatten them up. And the reason why we fatten them up is because we want more meat out of them. We want to sell the meat to somebody else. And so we want to get them ready for the day of slaughter. And this is a reference to you people who have lived your life eating the best foods and drinking the best drinks and fattening yourselves up. He says, you've got a day of slaughter coming. So this is extremely, now this is a very eye-opening first passage for us to read. That this is not just good advice here. This is not something that, just some good practical wisdom. This is a salvation issue. It's a salvation issue because clearly these people who were using their riches and their wealth and their luxury in a way that was considered selfish, these people are condemnations pronounced upon them. So this is important for us. So let me ask this question: What did Jesus want us to learn in Luke chapter 12, verses 13 through 15 about riches? So let's see who we're going to go to next here. Feel free to jump in if you want. I'll give you about 2 seconds to do that. Nobody does.
I can read it, Josh.
Awesome. Thanks, Craig. Luke 12, 13 through 15.
So someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care and be on guard against all covetousness, for life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions."
Okay. All right. So what did Jesus want us to learn about things? About things.
That life is not about what you can accumulate.
Yeah.
It wants us to look to a higher cause than just the things that are there that God has provided for us or that we might be blessed with, but that's not what our life should be centered around.
Your life does not consist in the abundance of the things that you possess. Right. That shouldn't be our life's focus. Why should that not be our life's focus? I think if we keep reading, we find out the answer as to why that should not be our life's focus. So we've got Luke 12, verses 16 through 21. Somebody else want to jump in there? I see a Katrina. Katrina, you want to read that for us? Luke 12, 16 through 21.
Sure can. Okay.
Thank you.
And he told him a parable, saying, The land of a rich man produced plentiful. And he thought to himself, What shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops. And he said, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry. But God said to him, Fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasures for himself and is not rich towards God.
Okay. So the rich fool, his ground is yielding plentifully. He's building bigger barns. He's got silos, barns. He's got all kinds of stuff. And God's question to him is, whose will those things be which you have provided when your soul is required of you? What's going to happen to all those things? It doesn't matter if if all you had was a cup in your house to drink out of, or if you have huge grain silos and barns. Whose are those things going to be when you're gone?
It's not going to be yours anymore.
Yeah, not going to be yours. It's going to be somebody else's, and it's not really going to matter in comparison to your soul. And so that's why Jesus says, don't let the focus of your life be the abundance of the things that you possess. Most of you guys know my grandmother passed away 2 or 3 weeks ago, and this verse really hits home, I think, when you go through that process of when somebody passes away and they have a house full of things. Okay. So I got my mom calling me and saying, do you want this? Do you want this antique? Do you want this antique? I'm like, no, I really don't want any of it. I'm trying to get rid of stuff. I love grandma, but I've lived 41 years without any of that stuff, and I will be just fine without it. I don't need anything. But I did take a couple things, by the way, but because they were pushed on me. But they're just things. They're just things. And when someone is gone and you have this house full of things and you have this house, what happens to it? Well, you give it to whoever wants it in the family. You sell the rest of it for pennies on a dollar, and then you sell the house. And if that's all your life was about, something that basically when you're gone is just going to be given away, sold in a flea market or at an auction, that's not really a good focus for your life. And so Jesus is making it clear to us, let your focus be more upon your soul. That's something that's going to last for all of eternity. Don't let your focus be on the earthly and the worldly things. All right, so when it comes to the big picture, Jesus doesn't want us to focus on that kind of stuff. So where should our focus be according to Matthew 6:33? This is one that we can probably quote, right? Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. So when it comes to your needs, God's going to provide for that. And so as a Christian, our focus shouldn't be on the earthly, the worldly, the material things, the cars, the money, the furniture, the decorations. The focus should be on the kingdom, So take a look at Matthew 6, verses 19 through 21. Who'd like to jump in there and read that for us? This
Hey,
is one that, yeah, go ahead.
Would it be okay if Bella read that?
That'd be wonderful, Bella. I would love for you to read. Sounds great.
Do not lay up for yourself treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be.
Okay.
Also.
Great job, Bella. Thank you. All right, so don't lay up for yourselves treasures on earth. I've got a friend that preached up in New York. Actually, we support him, Keith Sharp. If you guys have met Keith, I've known Keith since I was a little boy, and Keith preached up in New York, and I held a couple meetings up there when he was up there. He's in Arkansas now, but when he was in New York, they had some members. They had a bit of an issue there over this passage, and the issue was called the non-accumulation doctrine, is kind of what they called it. And they believed, based on verse 19, that it was a sin to have any financial accounts that accumulated. You weren't supposed to have savings accounts. You weren't supposed to have, money in stocks and financial portfolio. Whatever you had, you used it for what you needed, or you helped other people with it. And that's what they called it. Now, how would you respond to that? When Jesus says, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, how do you respond to that? Is that an absolute, or?
Hey, Josh, I think he's talking there about what principle you're going to live by. Are you going to live by the principle of my focus is on all these things around me, what I'm going to build up, and how successful I can make myself? Or is my focus on how spiritually minded can I be? How can I do things for the kingdom of God? And doing so, my treasure, if I live humbly and for God's purpose and live self-sacrificially, coming down the road later in heaven.
Right. Okay, good. I think one of the key things from this passage, in addition to what you're saying, is this is a comparison. All right, this is just a comparison. So the idea is de-emphasizing the less important thing and emphasizing the greater, the more important thing. And so, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth. The idea is that's less important. What's more important? Laying up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Jesus uses actually similar language in a couple of places. take a look at John 6 and verse 27. And I think when we see it in a couple of other contexts, we understand that it's not an absolute as much as it is a contrast. If you look at John 6 and verse 27, Jesus says, do not labor for the food which perishes. Does that mean we can't have jobs so that we can eat? Do not, what does he say? Do not labor for the food which perishes, but for the food which endures to everlasting life. The idea is it's a contrast. You know, we understand that we have to work, but what's more important even than work? It's laboring for the food which endures to everlasting life, living for Christ. And I'll show you one more passage where I think sometimes we don't understand that contrast. I'm getting off course a little bit, but that's all right. 1 Peter chapter 3 is another one. 1 Peter chapter 3, and it says in verse 3, do not let your adornment be merely outward, arranging the hair, wearing gold, or putting on fine apparel. And I know some people who take that verse completely literally, where it is a sin in their minds to wear gold. It is a sin to braid your hair. It's a sin to put on nice clothes. But I don't think that's the idea behind the passage. I think the idea is it's a contrast. Your focus in life, if it becomes the gold and the jewelry and the nails and the hair and the tan and all those things, rather than the hidden person of the heart with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, then our emphasis is on the earthly and material things. And so every one of those passages are a contrast really between earthly things and spiritual things. And we see those types of contrasts, not just here in Matthew, but in those passages as well. So just wanted to point it out. I don't think it's a sin to have a savings account. All right.
Hey, Josh?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. It's also about the right respect for money because it's valuable. And the wrong idea for money is thinking if you get $500, I heard the expression, you're going to be millionaire for a day because that's how long it's going to feel good.
Mhm.
You know, both the young man that wanted his inheritance first, he wasn't patient. He put too much value on what he could get just right away. But the worthy woman of Proverbs 31, a lot of her responsibilities had to do with the family finances. She was a businesswoman.
Mhm.
And so it's not that money is bad, it's just the right respect for it.
Yeah. I think that's a great point from Proverbs 31. Since you went there, let's take a look at that woman for just a moment. There's a woman in the New Testament that reminds me a little bit of the Proverbs 31 woman. It's the woman that Paul comes across in Acts chapter 16 while he's in Philippi, and says that she was a seller of purple. She was a businesswoman from the city of Thyatira, but she's in the city of Philippi doing her work. It wasn't a sin for her to work. It wasn't a sin for her to make an income. And we see the same thing with the Proverbs 31 woman. She's actually commended in Scripture because she considers a field and she buys it. She's investing wisely. And from her profits, she plants a vineyard. And she does that so that with that vineyard, she can help her family and she can help other people. And so those things are, and there's more things that are listed about her, but those things are seen as commendable. But I think the motivation with the Proverbs 31 woman, what does she do with her riches and her things and her investments? Well, she's caring for the poor. She's caring for her children, making them clothes. She's honoring and bringing honor to her husband and her family. So there's a lot of good that we can do also with riches and wealth. And that's the key. It's not that it's wrong to have it. It's wrong when our focus becomes just on that and not on how these things can be used spiritually. All right, so there's a really important question that's asked in Matthew 16, verses 24 through 27. So let's go to that one next. This is one that we probably should all have memorized. It's a great memory verse. Matthew 16, 24 through 27. Hattie's got her hand up, so Hattie, we'll let you read that. Go ahead.
What was the verse again?
Matthew 16, verses 24 through 27.
through 27.
Yes.
Okay. Then Jesus told the disciples, if anyone would come after me, let them deny himself and take up the cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what shall a man give in return for his soul? For the Son of Man is going to come with his angels in the glory of his Father. Then he will repay each person according to what he has done.
Okay. Important question. What's the important question there, Hattie, in verse 26? Why should we not be so focused on profit and the world? And
Because it won't matter when you die.
okay. What profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? What are you going to give in exchange for your soul? And so, as we think about this, why should we not accumulate and hoard riches? And why should we realize that our life does not consist in what we own? Why is it foolish to focus on material things? Because material things are just going to be left behind to somebody else, and we can't take it with us. Our soul's what's going to go to God. Why should we focus on the kingdom first? Because that's going to be something that can help people eternally, and something that's going to help us and our families and our friends and our neighbors and our every nation. It's going to help them eternally. That's why we should focus on the kingdom. Why should we have a greater focus on the kingdom than on material things? Because again, in the judgment, that's going to be what matters more. And yet at the same time, how many of us know people who kind of are like Esau? Genesis 25, I'm not going to read that particular passage, but in verses 29 through 34, you have this passage about Esau, who sold his birthright all because he was hungry and he wanted a pot of soup, pot of stew. He made a very bad decision by acting upon his fleshly lusts, something that was only going to last for a temporary, very short time. One pot of stew, it's only going to get you through a day. And he gave up something that would have blessed his family for generations. How many of us know people like that, though, where we're willing to give up our soul because of this one sin, because of a job, because of a woman, because of a man? Those are, giving up your soul for worldly, temporary things. It's a foolish thing. Bob had written down here, we are just temporary stewards of what we have anyways. So it's all about how we use it to help others. And that's a good point, Bob. So thanks for using the chat, by the way, Bob. I don't think I've mentioned that yet, but don't forget about that chat box if you're uncomfortable jumping in to any conversation. I hear somebody jumping in, though. Thought I did. Maybe not. All right. Next question. Let's actually take a look before we get to this question. Look at question number 2. If you've got your book, question number 2 in the back of your book. If you had the opportunity to help someone in need financially, would you do it? Or does the thought of giving up some of your hard-earned money bother you too much? I think that's a good question. You don't have to answer it out loud, but that might be something to think about. And I wanted to look at that question that's in the back because it sets us up for what we're going to read here in Matthew chapter 19 about the rich young ruler. Here's someone who was successful on earth, and he was asked to make one sacrifice, and he didn't want to make it. So let's read a little bit about him, because maybe sometimes we can have a little bit of the rich young ruler syndrome in us, where we can be a little bit, we'll make a lot of sacrifices, we'll do a lot of things for the Lord, but sometimes if it means making a sacrifice with our money, giving up our hard-earned money to somebody else, sometimes we can be maybe a little tight-fisted. So let's take a look at him. Anybody want to read that? Matthew 19, 16 through 24.
I can.
All right. Thank you, Sarah.
Just then a man came up to Jesus and asked, "Teacher, what good thing must I do to get eternal life?" "Why do you ask me about what is good?" Jesus replied. "There is only one who is good. If you want to enter life, keep the commandments." "Which ones?" he inquired. Jesus replied, "You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony. Honor your father and mother, and love your neighbor as yourself." "All these things I have kept," the young man said. "What do I still lack?" Jesus answered, "If you want to be perfect, go sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me."
All right. Then verses 22 through 24. You want to finish that off for us, Sarah?
Sure. When the young man heard this, he went away sad because he had great wealth. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Truly I tell you, it is hard for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of heaven. Again, I tell you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of God."
Okay. All right. That's a good reading. This was a good man. The rich young ruler was a good man in a lot of ways. But there was still something that Jesus noticed that he lacked. You know, what I think is kind of awesome about that question is that sometimes it takes an outsider to see things in us that we don't see in ourselves. And that's the situation here. You know, the rich young ruler, what he sees in himself is a lot of good things, and there were a lot of good things, but there was this one thing that Jesus points out that where he saw weakness, and Jesus knows people's hearts. So Jesus, you know, can identify weaknesses maybe better than we can, but not maybe, better than we can. He's Jesus. So he sees this in him, though. You know, you don't seem like you're willing to sacrifice for other people, and I want you to sell what you have and give it to the poor. Are you willing to do that? Are you really willing to do anything for the sake of the kingdom? And that rich young ruler was not willing to do that. And so just a question that I think we all have to ask ourselves at some point, and maybe good to ask it now, to just in your own mind. What are some of the financial sacrifices that sometimes maybe get in the way of full devotion to the kingdom? And that might be, you know, a giving thing, you know, giving back to the Lord on the first day of the week, or giving to others when they're in need. Sometimes it's a work thing. We're not willing to take off work, you know, on Wednesday night just for a little Zoom study, or we're not willing to take off work on a Sunday. That overtime that's time and a half this weekend. You know, sometimes we're not willing to make that sacrifice. Or we got a gospel meeting coming up Sunday through Wednesday. And, you know, maybe sometimes those types of things get in the way. But what are some of the sacrifices that you could make that might cost you a little bit financially, but the spiritual decision that you would make would benefit you greatly and other people by your influence? You don't have to answer that out loud, but think about that.
Hey, Josh.
Yeah, go ahead.
I would say probably a big thing that people face is sometimes when it comes to a job, especially maybe young people, you know, they get out into the world and have their new degree and are looking for work, and sometimes you're faced with a decision: am I going to take this job that's going to take me away from a good solid church and congregation, or is it going to take a lot of time away from me that I'm going to be able to do the things that I should do for the Lord? And that's a big temptation. I think that's one thing to consider. Sometimes that can take us away, or tempt and challenge us.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too. It's a good point too. Sometimes it might be sacrificing going to a certain college, even though it's a great college from the eyes of, you know, from a career standpoint, but but maybe spiritually it's not going to be good for you to go there. If there's not going to be any spiritual sustenance or encouragement or edification, it might put you at risk. And career-wise as well. We can go to places where, you know, we're gonna make a lot of money there, but it may not be a good decision for us spiritually to work in that particular career or in that particular place that it takes us. So good thoughts. Those are good thoughts. All right, so let's get to the key here. Obviously, I think we've established we've got to be willing to sacrifice spiritually or materially for the sake of the spiritual. So how do we get people to that point? How do we get people to the point that they're willing to make those decisions, where they're willing voluntarily to make those types of sacrifices? And I think there's a key here when we study about Paul, and Paul's kind of the next couple of passages we want to look at, because here is someone who is willing to do that. And why? What was the basis for why Paul was willing to make great sacrifices, you know, career-wise or financially, or even to his own life for the sake of Christ? And let's read it from Paul himself from a couple more passages here. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 23 through 27. 2 Corinthians 11, 23 through 27. Let's take a look at what he went through. Anybody want to jump in there and volunteer for us? Hey, Steve Cseplo, I see your name on here. Steve, could you read for us? Are you there?
Yeah, sorry, I was looking up something there. Go ahead. Yeah, what is it? What is it?
Awesome. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 23 through 27.
Sure. Got my app on my phone here.
Thank you.
Okay.
You're not driving, are you?
No.
If you're driving, you automatically can get out of this, okay?
Well, never mind. Okay, so are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool. I am more. In labors more abundant, and stripes above measure, in prisons more frequently, and deaths often. From the Jews, 5 times I received 40 stripes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I have been in the deep. In journeys often, in perils of waters, perils of robbers, in perils of my own countrymen, in perils of the Gentiles, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren, in weariness and toil, in sleeplessness often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings often, in cold and nakedness.
Yeah. Why was Paul willing to go through all that? He didn't have to. And yet, this is just reading that list is amazing. Why was he willing to get put in prison, to get beaten, to be shipwrecked, to put his life in danger? Why? I see Joni's got a hand up there. And maybe this is Joni. Sometimes Joni is Dave. So maybe that was an accident.
Let me say something, because Paul saw Jesus on the road to Damascus.
There you go.
Quite something.
There you go. Why would Paul be willing to do that? Because he had faith in the resurrected Jesus. And he was not concerned with losing his life or with suffering, because he had confidence there was an eternity ahead of him. Okay, so confidence in an everlasting eternal reward is going to cause us to be willing to diminish whatever temporal rewards that we might have, or whatever earthly sacrifices we might have to make here on earth. And that's really his message in Philippians 3, 7 through 11. So thanks for reading that, Steve. Tom, I see your name right next to Steve on my screen. Tom, you want to read Philippians 3, 7 through 11 for us?
Sure, Josh.
Thank you.
Philippians 3, 7 through 11.
Yes, sir.
All right, starting in verse 7 here. But whatever gain I had, I counted as loss for the sake of Christ. Indeed, I count everything as loss because of the surpassing worth of knowledge, Jesus Christ, my Lord. For his sake I have suffered the loss of all things, and count them as rubbish, in order that I may gain Christ, and be found in him, not having a righteousness of my own that comes from the law, but that which comes through faith in Christ, the righteousness from God that depends on faith, that I may know him and the power of his resurrection, and may share his sufferings, becoming like him in his death, that by any means possible I may obtain the resurrection from the dead.
Okay. There's the key right there, that last phrase. I am willing to suffer loss of anything if it means the resurrection from the dead. And if we could have the faith of Paul in the resurrection of Jesus, then we will be willing to make the sacrifices that Paul made for the sake of the kingdom. And so because of this, because we understand when we look at passages like the ones we've looked at today, you know, the temporal things are going to stay here. Eternity is really what matters. Then what really needs to be our view towards earthly things? So take a look. We're going to look at two more passages. I'm going to skip over the Ecclesiastes passages, but look at 1 Timothy 6, 6 through 10. What is the right view of our home, our clothes, our money, our things? What's the right view? Somebody want to read that?
I can read that.
Thank you, Cliff.
It's what verses?
1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 6 through 10.
All right. Now godliness with contentment is great gain, for we are brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. Having food and clothing, with these we shall be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and harmful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness and pierced themselves through with many sorrows.
Okay. Thank you, Cliff. And so what's the key to what should our focus be? Well, be content with what you have. Be content. If you've got food on the table, clothes on your back, this passage says you should be content with that. That's all you need to get through life day by day. And if you desire to be rich, that's a temptation. It's a snare. It's going to create problems in our family. It's going to create problems when it comes to the conflict of faith. And we need to be careful. So Steve has a comment in the group chat, so I'm going to read that. He says, Paul's main idea of Romans helped shed light upon his mission to minister, where he says, I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, because it is the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes, for the Jew first and also for the Greek. So good point, Steve. Paul stayed on mission, stayed focused. Not ashamed of preaching the gospel or whatever suffering that preaching the gospel would bring upon him. All right. So last little bit of advice is from 1 Timothy 6. Let's look at verses 17 through 19. Since we were already in that text, I just wanted to skip on down there. What should we do if we are rich? All right. We got to be content just with food and clothing. But if we do have an excess and an abundance of things, and we are blessed in this world with riches, then what does God want us to do with those things? So last passage, verses 17 through 19. Anybody want to volunteer? Or
Josh,
yes.
I have Chris here who
All
wants
right.
to read. Are you ready for him?
Absolutely, Chris. Love to hear you read.
Haughty. Okay, so start with As for the Rich.
As for the rich in his present age, charge them not to be haughty, nor to set their hopes on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly provides us with everything to enjoy. They are to do good, to be the rich in good works, to be generous and to be generous and ready to share.
And then 19, thus storing
Thus storing up treasure for themselves as a good foundation for their future. So they may take hold of that which is truly life.
Great job, Chris. Thank you so much for reading for us. What do we need to do with our riches? Well, he says, do good with it. Be rich in good works. Be ready to give. Doesn't mean you got to give everything away, but when the moment presents itself, when there is someone who is in need that you can give to, be ready to give and be willing to share. Not everybody's willing to share. And this passage says we should. And the reason why, what's awesome in verse 19 is you store up for yourselves not a bigger bank account. You actually store up for yourselves a good foundation for the time to come. You're storing up an eternal reward when you give and when you bless others as you've been blessed. And so that's the encouragement of Paul to those who are rich. Don't be haughty about your riches. Don't let that lead to arrogance or pride. There's another comment here from Steve. He says, we also notice back to Matthew 6, a lot of points that Jesus speaks is of pride and vainglory, where Jesus says you cannot serve money and God. We realize money and God is not compatible with each other. Pride is the root of money and riches, and we need to look at Colossians, where we need to set our mind on things from above, not on things such as material possessions of this earth. So thank you. Thank you, Steve. And I think pride and vainglory are, I think that's what's in mind when he says, don't let your riches make you haughty. Don't become arrogant and stuck up because you have a lot. In fact, be willing to share what you have with others. You have greater responsibility with greater riches. Bob?
Yeah, Josh, what I was going to say is, the key, you talked about contentment earlier. I think most of us probably don't struggle with wanting to be rich or really going after a lot of things that way. But as human beings, we tend not to be content with things that surround us. And we're just inundated every day with, let's get that new car or get a bigger house or have that better vacation. And those are the things that can creep up on us and become the priority. So.
Yeah. Great point. And that's how it can become a snare to you. Trying to keep up with the phrase my parents used to use, quit trying to keep up with the Joneses. You're not them. Don't think that you have to compare yourself to them and be them, to be pleasing to God. Do we have any Joneses here? I was trying to think. I don't know. But all right. So that's what I think we need to consider. Take a look at the application if you have your books. And I'm just going to read what I thought was a pretty good phrase here. He says, while it's good to do your best when working for someone, if you notice that your job is consuming all of your time and your spiritual life is suffering, you need to prayerfully reevaluate the importance of your job. Be willing, he says, even to look for a new job that will allow you more freedom, because your spiritual bank account is more important than your earthly bank account. And he says, remind yourself daily that your treasure is in heaven, that you cannot take your worldly riches or power with you. We should consider whatever riches and power we have as a gift from God. It's to be used for his glory. And the key to dealing with worldly success is learning to be content with what we have instead of continually wanting more. And in America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, sometimes that certainly is a big temptation to just keep wanting more and more. And be content and be busy in the kingdom. So that's our lesson I've got for today. I want to remind you all that we have a gospel meeting starting Sunday morning with Jonathan Brown. So I'm looking forward. I've never met Jonathan myself. So I'm looking forward to meeting him and getting to know him and his family. I want to encourage you to be there Sunday. I want you to remind you, Sunday night is a live stream lesson. So if you're not familiar with how to access the live stream, we did live stream for about 2 or 3 straight months. So hopefully you're familiar, but we're going to do Facebook Live. We're also going to try to live stream on the YouTube site. And so if you've never subscribed to our YouTube page, go to Laurel Canyon Church of Christ on YouTube and subscribe to it and share that with other people as well. But that's how you'll access the Sunday night sermon. And then Monday through Wednesday, I believe we're going to be in the building or live streaming. And so just want to encourage you to, make time on your calendars to be there, to study with Jonathan. And don't forget, next Saturday, we've got our thinking about our screen time, thinking about social media. And we call that a youth lectureship sometime, but I did want you to see, I have a lesson in there on parents and social media, okay? So that's for you parents as well as kids to think about, how do I parent my children when it comes to their phones and social media. Not that I'm the perfect parent, so in that, but I'm excited about that lesson. Actually, I'm pretty excited to teach it. Been looking at some stuff, so looking forward to that as well. Thanks to Craig and Becky Davis, by the way. They're hosting the Browns, and I don't want to give people too much credit, but I mean, when you've got a family with, like, I don't know, I lost count how many kids they have. They have nine children. Okay. When you're hosting a family with 9 kids, that's a big deal, guys. That's a big deal.
Sorry.
So with
They have
that,
8.
8. Oh, okay. Yeah. But yeah. All right. So it's not as big as hosting, Jacob and his 12 sons, but it's pretty good. All right. So thanks to them for doing that. All right. We're going to close with, unless somebody has anything else they want to mention, we're going to close with a prayer, and then we'll sign out here.